Sonic the Hedgehog. He's a pretty fast guy, always going on epic world-spanning romps. The majority of Sonic's adventures always felt big. But what if they could fit in the palm of your hand? That's Sonic handheld games. And for over 20 years, those were the games that kids, and people of all ages too I guess, that didn't have access to a home console had to play. That's me. I was that kid. Hi, I'm Pedro from Nintendo, and today we'll be ranking all Sonic handheld games. They were kinda their own thing, really, and very different from their big brothers sometimes. And even though I was a Sonic kid myself, there were a ton of games that I didn't get a chance to play myself. Now with the Nintendo Switch blurring the lines between handheld and home console, I'm not sure if we'll ever see these kinds of games again. With that in mind, I wanted to make sort of a me-review for these games, just to make sure that I acknowledge their legacy. I have just one rule though, I'm including exclusive handheld games only. If the game is a one-to-one port from a home console game, it will not count towards this list. Sonic 1 for the Game Gear, while very different from its Genesis counterpart, is the exact same game from the Master System, and therefore does not count for this. However, Sonic Generations on the 3DS is a wildly different game when compared to the HD one, so it does count towards the list. I know that might sound like a cop-out for the two of you that played Sonic Chaos on the Game Gear, but we are still covering over 30 games today, so come on, give me a break. I tried my best to stay as close as possible to original hardware and official release for most of these games, like the 3DS Virtual Console, resorting to emulation only for the more obscure ones. Yeah, you see what I'm talking about. Are we good? We good. Okay, then roll the intro. Our list begins with Sonic Drift for the Game Gear, released only in Japan. Made to cash in on the kart racing hype after the humongous success of Super Mario Kart on the SNES, but on the Game Gear. Yeah, being on the Game Gear definitely hurt this game a lot. I get what they were going for, trying to stay closer to Outrun than Mario Kart, but the Game Gear doesn't have the specs to make this game pop. The tracks are all based on Sonic 1 zones and they look quite nice for the hardware, but the game is lackluster in content and fun. And that's not a good sign when your game was released 2 years after Super Mario Kart. Sonic Drift goes to the D tier. Off to a good start. Hopefully it gets better from here. So, I never actually played most of the Game Gear games before, because I thought they were lesser experienced than the Genesis games, made for a quick buck. But then if Sonic Triple Trouble didn't make me swallow these words. First of all, it's called Sonic and Tails 2 in Japan, the first one being a cross-release for the Master System. This time, however, I think the devs didn't have to waste development resources on 2 versions and focused entirely on the Game Gear and its strengths. And oh boy, it shows. It's called Triple Trouble here in the West because in the game's plot you are dealing with Metal Sonic, Fang the Sniper, or Nike the Weasel, and Knuckles all at the same time. Plus Robotnik, of course. It's impressive in scope for a Game Gear title and it pays off. Sonic is really fast, and Tails can even fly. That's right, you have 2 playable characters. And all the unique power-ups and mechanics are very fun. It's nothing like the Genesis games, and yet it feels perfect at home with the series. The final level can get a bit boring, and the screen resolution of the Game Gear does hurt a bit as you can never be sure of what's in front of you, and it could easily be an S tier if it wasn't for this. There's a fun remake other words that you can play right now, but we are only counting official releases here. Oh, and also, Knuckles fucking drowns. So, we are back at Sonic Drift. This one has a little more meat, better graphics, more playable characters, and a bigger selection of tracks. This time the tracks are based on zones from Sonic 2, 3, and more. And collecting rings and being able to use items like Mario Kart makes this more fun than the first one. But it's still held back by the hardware, being too basic and too hard to play. But it is a bit better than the first one, and some fun can be had. So Sonic Drift 2 goes to the C tier. Also released only in Japan, just like the first Sonic Drift, we have the first solo adventure that Tails ever starred in, Tails Sky Patrol. Okay, so I was kinda anxious to play this game, as it's regarded on the Sonic fan community as one of the worst Sonic games, and because of that I have never given this a fair chance. So, is it that bad? No, it's not. It can be very frustrating at the beginning, when you are getting used to the way Tails controls, as he is constantly firing with a stamina meter that, when depleted, will make him fall to the ground and die immediately. And even the first level, literally called Training Zone, will eat you a couple of lives. You also have a ring called the Boomerang, now that's a punny pun, that you can toss at enemies and will come back to you. And it's not bad at all, I had a ton of fun playing this one, trying to optimize my time by memorizing the layout of the stage and getting through the end before my stamina meter depleted. And this concept is the exact foundation which Sonic is built upon, so it works in my book. It's kinda janky, yeah, and the screen resolution of the Game Gear is once again getting in the way of this game being better. But Tails' Sky Patrol is a solid B tier for me. The West wouldn't get a Tails solo game until late in '95 with Tails Adventure. In comparison to the last entry, Tails Adventure is viewed in a way better regard on the community. But, I don't see. For starters, it's a way slower experience than any of the games we've looked so far, and that's no good. Tails is so slow that it makes platforming a chore. To better illustrate the gameplay loop in Tails Adventure, try to see it like this. It's like a babe's first Metroidvania, but broken up into stages that are accessible through the minimap, and you have to keep exploring them, finding items and backtracking to unlock new routes. But item management is so boring. You can only bring 4 items with you before going to a stage, and every time you need to make changes to your inventory, you have to go back to Tails' house, and so it plays slow, and every mechanic makes this game feel even slower. I'm not that much into Metroidvania and adventure games in general, so I won't let my bias get much in the way, but I think Tails Adventure deserves the C tier. Sonic Labyrinth is usually paired with Tails' Sky Patrol as one of the worst games by the community. It's understandable. I mean, in the plot, Robotnik swapped Sonic's shoes while he was sleeping for slow shoes, and now he can't go fast. Sonic is stuck in his labyrinth with an isometric view where you have to collect 3 keys before opening the gate to the exit. Kinda reminiscent of Sonic 3D Blast, honestly, but you have to do everything under a time limit, and that does sound like a recipe for disaster. Or that's what one would think, but you can still spin dash in this game, and it's actually super fun, not gonna lie, the spin dash is surprisingly fast and erratic. Taking damage is not a deal breaker either, as I don't think you can actually die. When you take damage, the keys you've already collected scattered around, but they don't go too far, so there's plenty of room for error. Not exactly the ideal game to put Sonic in for sure, but not as bad as people may say. It does overstay its welcome a bit. Sonic Labyrinth goes in the C tier. Yeah, so according to my own rules, Sonic Gen for the game does count, as it's not a one-to-one part to the Saturn game, or even to the games it's trying to emulate. Oh boy, this has worse physics than Sonic 4. All the sound effects are horribly compressed, and it barely has any stage in total. It's sluggish and ugly, and if I keep talking about all the negatives of this game, I'll be giving it way more time than it's worth. D tier. Going forward, all games will feature what was at the time Sonic's new design, or, modern design if you wanna be a dick. And sadly, none of these games released on a Sega console, so yeah, there's that. Yikes. This era kicks off with Sonic Pocket Adventure, which, fun fact, it's the only Sonic game to have a perfect score on IGN. This game feels like someone put Sonic 2, Sonic 3 and a NES on a blender, and this is what came out of it. Levels are based on zones from Sonic 2, while the music's from Sonic 3, while the graphics would feel right at home on the 8-bit era, right next to Mega Man and Super Mario Bros. It has new bosses though, so instead of a Wrecking Ball Robotnik, I guess it's Eggman from now on. So instead of a Wrecking Ball Eggman, has a hammer, for example. So is it a 10 out of 10 like IGN says? Well, I wouldn't say that, it's a great game for sure, but the recycled themes from Sonic 2 and the fact that Sonic is the only playable character, even though Tails is fully programmed in for the multiplayer, doesn't sit well with me. The special stages also suffer from the hardware, as rings spawn too close to Sonic, and you only have one chance per level to go to them, so if you don't play perfect, the first time you won't see the true ending. The game does save your progress and you can replay levels, so it's not a deal breaker, but Sonic Pocket Adventure goes to the A tier. Hey, it's Sonic on the Game Boy Advance! Sonic Advance was made by the same company as Sonic Pocket Adventure, Addendum. They would be the ones developing the main handheld games for years to come, and this is a blast. For the first time, the handheld games were able to fully recreate the feeling of the Genesis era. Gorgeous graphics, great soundtrack, amazing levels, 4 playable characters. The throwbacks to the classic games are inspired, but they don't feel forced or simply copied. The first boss, I think, is actually a reference to the first boss in the last game, as Eggman is also again using a hammer. The only negative thing I can say about this game has to do with the special stages, which you can enter by finding a special spring on every zone, and it is a pseudo 3D perspective, making it borderline unfair to collect the necessary amount of rings to win. And fortunately, the emeralds are shared between every character, so if you're going for 100% completion, you'll have plenty of chances. Sonic Advance is a solid S tier. 1 year later, Jinx released
Sonic Advance 2!
bringing back the incredible sprite work from the first game, with more inspired level themes. Music playing its peak Sonic level design, and a new playable character too, Green the Rabbit, and making Sonic and friends even faster than before. Even the bosses are fought while running, so that's awesome. Look, the first boss is also a game using a hammer, just like in Pocket Adventure. So, this is another S rank, right? Well, no. Despite all the good stuff in it, Sonic Advance 2 does have some blurry flaws. First, almost all the stages are littered with bottomless pits and poor enemy placement. You were kinda punished for going too fast, and that's a problem when that's the focus of your game. But that's nothing compared to the special stages. First of all, to even get into one, you have to find 7 special rings scattered around each act in one go. That requires a lot of exploration, backtracking and trial and error. And this time, emeralds aren't shared between characters, and only the ones you collect as Sonic counts toward unlocking the true ending. Considering that you'll probably play as him for the first time, you'll have to do levels again and again. This wouldn't be a problem if you could enter special stages with 3 special rings, as that's totally doable, but 7's too much and goes again against the idea of going too fast. Because of that, unfortunately, Sonic Advance 2 goes to the A tier. Solid game, but flawed in some key aspects. So, Sonic Pinball Party. Let's be honest, this should be called Sega Pinball Party. But Sonic sells, so let's put his name into the title, I guess. It's very colorful and full of detail and impeccable pinball physics, and scoring something like 10,000 points is totally doable and not hard at all. Unlike that Sonic Frontier's terrible minigame. It is a bit shallow and all of the tables are very similar, and look, I'm a fan of pinball tables, really. But as a video game, I think this would work better as something more diegetic, like Sonic's Pinball. So yeah, B tier. So yeah, Sonic N technically counts, as it is a part of a handheld game and not a home console one, but it's basically Sonic Advance all over again. It's missing some of the game's modes, like the Tiny Shell Garden, but it plays exactly as you would expect. Fortunately, the controls were not compromised at all for this release. I was expecting way less from a Sonic game on the Nokia N-Gage. The screen resolution of the N-Gage is not ideal for a Sonic game, as you can't see too far ahead, but you can toggle between a close-up view or a zoomed-out view that's basically the GBA game crammed into the N-Gage screen at any time with a press of a button. It was clearly not made with this spec radio in mind. This was going to be an A tier, but god, the music is terrible. It actually gave me a headache while playing, so because of that, this is going to the B tier. Finally, something that I grew up playing with. Sonic Battle was my Super Smash Bros. As a kid, and instead of the traditional formula, it answers the question, what if Sonic was a fighting game in 3D on the freaking Game Boy Advance? Well, this is what it is. Some people don't like the look of this game, but personally I think it's gorgeous and stylish as hell, especially on the tiny GBA screen. And the music, great, listen to this. Now, for a fighting game, it's very simple in execution, as the GBA only has 2 face buttons, plus 2 shoulder buttons. For hardcore fighting game players, this might be a turn-off, but I like the simplicity, as you don't have to memorize complex button combinations for specials and combos. Surprisingly, this game is very focused on the story, and the plot picks up threads from Sonic Adventure 2 and Shadow the Hedgehog of all things, and most of not all games until now existing on their own bubble. But Sonic Battle puts itself right next to the home console games with this story and characters. This new character, Emerald, has an interesting origin and arc through the game, and all of the cast is on point. You can also customize Emerald's moveset with abilities you acquire as you progress through the game, making it very interesting. This game, as close to my heart as it is far from perfect. At the beginning of the game, Emerald is super weak and slow, and you are forced to play as him on multiple occasions. Not only that, but the game feels the need to pad out its runtime by making you fight the same enemy over and over again to 10 or 15 times in a row. It has high production values for sure, but wastes too much of the player's time to prove its worth, and so it ends up getting too boring and repetitive for its own good. I wish there was a ROM hack of Sonic Battle to reduce the amount of padding it has, but as is, it goes into the B tier. Dimps is at it again with
Sonic Advance 3!
Nope, not doing this joke again. And that's it! Sonic Advance 3 is the pinnacle of Sonic on the GBA. Way more levels than the previous 2. An amazing soundtrack with different remixes for each of the 3 acts of a zone. Gorgeous graphics and sprite work once again, and the plot picks up right where Sonic Battle left, making all of the GBA games come together in max. It also introduces a new villain called Emerald, an Eggman manufactured version of Emerald from Sonic Battle. Speaking of Eggman, there he is again with a hammer. But the biggest improvement Sonic Advance 3 brings to the table is the character parry, where you can choose different combinations of characters to play as. You will control one character while the other follows you, much like Tails did in Sonic 2, except that the character that accompanies you will actually influence your abilities, making it super fun to try out new combinations. Personally, Sonic and Knuckles is my go-to pair. The special stages aren't just that this time around. You have to find and collect all the 9 chow around the acts and hub areas. Then, a key will appear on every act, and collecting those will grant you a chance to try the special stage for the zone. The special stages themselves aren't terrible either. They are actually pretty fun as you fly around the Tornado 2 collecting rings. And just like Sonic Advance 1, the emeralds are shared between all the characters, and you don't have to get all the chow in one go, making this a fair and fun game. Do I need to say more? S tier. Whew, that last era ended on a banger. The Game Boy Advance, and I guess the Neo Geo Pocket too, offered a ton of great games. There's just no way they will be going to top the... Rush was Sonic's debut on the DS, and wow, what a mark it left. I don't think there is a more stylish game, period. The music by Hideki Nakanuma is pure hype and goes way harder than he has any right to. This was also the introduction of the boost, a mechanic that would eventually make its way to the home console titles. A landmark for Sonic handheld games for sure. It's fun to play around and perform tricks to keep your boost meter full. Actually it's called a potential gauge. Sure, whatever. The boost makes a great addition to Sonic's moveset, making it super fun to speedrun stages, find the optimal route. Unfortunately, the level design doesn't always take advantage of how fast Sonic can go, instead forcing you to stop to defeat a certain number of enemies before you are being able to progress, or putting you in your auto-scroller level. It makes no sense. Also, the Bottomless Spirit syndrome from Sonic Advance 2 is back again. Did I mention that Dimps also developed this? Wait, where's the hammer, Eggman? Does that count? This game is also the debut of Blaze the Cat. She plays a little different from Sonic, being a lot more airborne, but it's not as different as playing as Tails or Knuckles, which is a problem because you have to beat every stage twice, once with Sonic and again with Blaze to get the true final boss. Levels are a bit generic when compared to what we've seen so far, as they default to the basic Sonic trope of Green Forests, casinos, and sky bases and such. It does have one, if not the best special stages in the series, due to how precise the stylus movement is. Solid game, but after a whole era of bangers, it could be a bit better. Sonic Rush is a solid A tier. By the way, the next game should be Sonic the Hedgehog Genesis for the GBA, that atrocious part of Sonic 1. And we will not be counting that since it's a straight up port, even if the butchered one. But I think it's funny how it was released after Rush was already out. I still remember being a kid looking at videos of Sonic Rivals and really wanting to play it. But I only had a DS at the time. Well, now I have a PSP and I can finally play it. It is a game, I guess. More like a racing game of sorts, actually. A 1v1 racing game where you have to beat the stage before opening this. Much like the competition mode from Sonic 2 and 3, but turned into a full game. And I'm sorry, I don't think this works. Not only the game is awkward to play, with weird power-ups, but it's also janky as hell. I don't know how the performance can be this terrible when the game looks so ugly. And it has frame rate dips for no apparent reason. Maybe the game is just too ugly for the PSP to run it properly. And not serious though, the PSP has some amazing games with amazing graphics and home console-like scope. So why is Sonic Rivals like this? And don't even get me started on the forgettable soundtrack and dumb plot of Eggman Nigga wanting to transform everything into cards. It would go into the D tier, but I can't say that I didn't have some fun with it, so it goes on the C tier instead. Sonic Rush Adventure is what you get when you bring back almost everything that made Sonic Rush great, and make it even better. You can still go fast as all hell thanks to the boost mechanic, and this time around the level design actually allows you to go as fast as you want, without stopping you to do some chores. And you don't have to play the stage twice this time around, being able to choose if you want to play as Sonic or Blaze. Mix that with a way better plot and world building that is reflected on the level themes, with some crafting and a high-sea exploration and a ton of side missions to complete, and you'll have an awesome game. And sure, it's not maybe as stylish as the first one, and part of that is because Hideki Naganuma didn't return to compose the soundtrack, but what's here is still very good and a better time overall. And by the way, you don't fight Eggman in this game, so I guess the absence of the hammer trope is more justifiable now. Yeah, and S tier. So, Sonic Rivals 2 is still super ugly, but it performs a lot better now with no frame rate drops that I could tell. And it's basically the same 1v1 formula of the first one, with more characters and a more well-thought story. It now has voice acting too, which bumps up the production value a little, but the music is still very forgettable for the most part. It also introduces a new mode where instead of racing, you have to brawl your opponent, and yeah, it's super janky and tacked on. It is a little better, but not where it really matters. I would say C tier, but don't let it slip into B tier only because of the banger of a song the first level has, which is honestly the only good track in the whole game. So, Mario and Sonic meet for the first time at the Olympic Games. This version being very different from the home console one, so it does count towards the list. And it's barely a game, honestly. It's a collection of very shallow and short sports minigames, and half of them will absolutely destroy your touchscreen. It does have a lot of characters from both franchises, and this is one of the best looking games on the DS. But after the novelty of this legendary crossover wears off, what's left is a very shallow experience. It's going on the D tier. Ugh, Sonic Chronicles. I knew this freaking game would be the most challenging part of this list. It's a long-ass game and not a very good one. Everything moves super slow. No, seriously. Moving on the overworld is slow, and choosing and executing our moves in battle is slow. Even the story feels like it's moving at a snail's pace. Even though the story could be interesting at times, everything felt like an Archie comic Sonic plot. It reeks cheapness, from presentation to graphics and especially in the sound department. The music is a joke. And all of the effects sound like generic Looney Tunes stock sound effects. I don't know what's going on. I mean, Sonic lore could be working to a great RPG. And it was developed by BioWare from Mass Effect fame. But somehow, somewhere, the recipe went wrong and we end up with this T-tier bombshell of a game. Wow, what an improvement over the first one Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Winter Games is. Jeez, that title took longer to finish than the first game. But this game, Mario and Sonic 2 for convenience, comes with a robust story mode where Bowser and Eggman team up to create their own Olympic Games by stealing the 6 snow spirits. It's a very cheesy and not really good plot, but it's decent. A lot of care was put into this entry and it shows. And it's not perfect, this mode is filled with backtracking and time wasters to trick you into thinking it has more meat than it actually has, but what makes this game really stand out are the dream events. These events ditch the traditional Olympic sports in favor of making something wacky and impossible in real life, like a snow tank battle or a rocket ski race with Mario Kart Alliance for example. I think this glow up deserves the B tier. So I wasn't really going to include Sonic Classic Collection on this list, since it's a collection of all the mainline games for the Sega Genesis, which is a home console, but I included Sonic Jam for the Gamecom, and this exact packaging is only available on the DS, so yeah, let's do it. First of all, I'm really impressed by how good the emulation is, especially on the DS side. It sure requires a lot of dev trickery to get around the limitations. So much so that Sega actually hired the developer of a homebrew DS Genesis emulator, where he ironed out the application to almost perfection. If I'm not mistaken, this will be the last time Sonic 3 and Knuckles would be included in a collection until Sonic Origins, by the way. But actually, this still has the original soundtrack intact, so that's a plus. It is kinda lackluster in extra content, having only a gallery with a dozen of illustrations and nothing more. Some Game Gear games would have been super welcomed, especially since this is the only handheld Sonic collection. A perfectly fine Game Gear emulator for the DS already existing in the community by this time, so I don't see why not. As is, this was a pretty solid way to digitally play the classics on the go at the time, and even today I would say. A tier it is. Some consider Sonic Colors on the DS to be like Sonic Rush 3. I don't. Even though it's clearly built on the Sonic Rush engine, there are lots of small changes that make this feel very different. We lose the trick system in exchange for the homing attack, wall jump, stomp, crouch, and of course, the wisps. Now you earn the boost by collecting white wisps, and that's enough to completely change the way you approach the game. Most of these new moves are completely circumstantial, used only to navigate around specific areas, and the same goes for the wisps. I like the stomp though. It can be used to great effect to fall down to the ground when you are airborne. And even though it's not rush-free, it is still super fun all around, with varied level designs and gimmicks to keep the gameplay from feeling stale, as well as lots of missions. And really good special stages, bringing back the half pipe from Sonic Rush, but now you have to collect colored orbs in each turn, adding a layer of depth. It features a gallery with unlockable music and concept art, and gosh, I love this kind of stuff in games. I think it elevates the value of a game by a ton. It even has a secret final boss exclusive to this version. This is the canon version of Sonic Colors, and you can't change my mind. Sonic Colors is once again an S tier for the DS library. Yeah, this got me thinking, we never actually got a DS version of Sonic Unleashed. Since, Dinks was working on Sonic Unleashed for the Wii and PS2. Gosh, I wish we got a 2D version of Sonic Unleashed there as well. What? Oh no. And so this is Sonic Unleashed for Java phones. And it plays as well as it sounds. I didn't know that Java games were still a thing when Sonic Unleashed released, but they are to this day. So yeah, as you can see, Sonic has a complicated history with Java games, with some being super obscure, like Sonic Kart 3DX or Sonic Gold 3D. Unfortunately, game preservation for these kinds of games is very lacking, with most of them being lost to time with no known dump. And this is a problem not exclusive to Sonic, which is a shame because while Sonic Unleashed here is a poor attempt at a game, some great titles do exist for Java phones, and a lot of people will never be able to experience them. That's why game preservation is very important, it should be supported. Well, anyway, I just wanted to mention that those existed, and if you want to know a little more of what is documented of these games, please follow the link on the description. But bear in mind that the page was last updated in 2009, so there must be a lot of content missing. Now, back to our list. If you want to insist that Sonic Colors is Rush 3, then Sonic Generations on the 3DS is Sonic Rush 4. See how stupid that sounds? It might not be a Rush game, but it definitely feels like a rushed game. Legend tells that a Wii version of Sonic Generations was in production, but got scrapped, and Dimps had to hastily put together this 3DS game instead, and apparently with the budget of a grocery shop trip. What was felt charming on the DS, like the cutscenes, now come off as cheap. On the gameplay side of things, all the moves from Sonic Colors returned, except the Stomp for some reason. Why? And thankfully, all the levels are great, especially for modern Sonic. But classic Sonic gets the short end of the stick, with his first 3 levels being copied and pasted from the Genesis games. Also, what a missed opportunity to bring levels from the whole handheld Sonic game catalog, with only water plays from Sonic Rush making an appearance. On the other hand, the soundtrack has some awesome remixes like Big Art, and the special stages from Sonic Heroes Return, but this time around they are fun. Seems like Dimps really got the special stage things right after the growth pace of the GBA, but overall, Sonic Generations on the 3DS is a lesser experience than anything the DS era offered. B tier. Mario and Sonic at the London 2012 Olympic Games keeps the trend of making these titles more and more ridiculous each time. But really, this game has great presentation and amazing graphics. I don't know what's up with these games having top-notch graphics for their hardware, but damn, I like it. And gladly the story mode returns. This time, Eggman and Bowser are pissed because they weren't invited to the Olympics, and they try to ruin it by using a magical fake fog in London. Yeah, the story clearly doesn't take itself serious, and the writing is great because of that. It teaches the top-down view RPG exploration from the previous game, in favor of a mission structure with cutscenes in between, and for the most part the cutscenes are very well animated, and that puts Sonic Generations to shame. Besides the story modes, there are whopping 57 events to play. However, they are all over in seconds. And the Dream events don't return on this version, which was arguably the best thing of the last game. It's like one step forward, two steps back, since the basic minigames are shallow as all hell. So Mario Sonic 3 falls under the C tier. Sonic Lost World on the 3DS is the first and only handheld game to feature the ZX. But that's just a fancy way of saying it's a 3D game with 360-degree movement. Once again developed by Dimps, this one shares the same plot as the Wii U and PC version of the game, including the exact same pre-rendered cutscenes. Except here they look like toaster burst in first, not sure why. Plenty of 3DS games use pre-rendered move files and they don't look this bad. They aren't even on stereoscopic 3D for gosh sake. But the level designs are very different from the home console, so it counts. And at first sight, this looks like a great game. Sonic plays and feels great, the parkour system is especially fun to mess around. The music and sound effects are top notch, although I'm not really sure why the run button exists when there is no reason to ever welcome this game. And holding R on my small new 3DS gives me more creeps than playing Kid Icarus or Horizon. Besides that, the first world is super fun to play and move around. Unfortunately, after that the game kinda devolves. The wisps are back from Sonic Colors, and this time they feel more like a hindrance than a cool power-up. And the same goes for the level design and gimmicks, they are all very annoying. For example, we were forced to defeat a certain number of enemies before moving on a lot of stages. There is some fun to be had here, although very flawed, but what's definitely not fun are the special stages, where it seems like Dimps once again forgot how to make them. As you have to move Sonic around using the 3DS's motion sensors, and it is as fun as it sounds. There's no way to beat a special stage while seated still, you have to move around your own. Just imagine someone trying to play this on a train or bus while going to school or work. Sonic Lost World definitely has ambition for a 3DS game, but falls short in the C tier. Sonic Boom Strider Crystal on the 3DS is a prequel to the Wii U game. At least I think it is, since in the beginning of the game Sonic and friends don't know Lyric yet, and I haven't played Sonic Boom on the Wii U to say for sure if they already know each other by the time the game starts, so yeah, I would say it's a prequel. This game is not that bad actually. I was expecting way worse based solely on the reputation of its big brother, but no, it has some amazing pre-rendered cutscenes that make Lost World look like crap. It's fine if a little too slow for a Sonic game. You can swap between Sonic, Tails, Sticks and Knuckles with a touch of the D-pad, each of them having a unique ability and little differences, like Tails being able to fly on currents and so on, kinda like Sonic Heroes to a degree. Level design is a bit too blocky for my taste, and there are very few slopes on them, and when there are, they have no effect whatsoever on the character's speed or movement. And it has a run button again, but now it's mapped to the Y, which is miles better. It's still a run-of-the-mill Sonic game. It's generic, while not being too bad or too good, but it goes in the C tier. Mario and Sonic at the Rio 2016 Olympic Games has amazing presentation and graphics, as I would expect from the series at this point. The quality may vary, but goddamn if these games aren't a showpiece. So, story mode is back again, and boy, I'm glad that this is a staple that hasn't gone away since the second game. This one being the first one to play on the rivalry of Mario and Sonic, as you don't play as each of the characters. Instead, you play as a Mii who just arrived at Rio de Janeiro for the Olympics, and has to choose if you are going to compete for Mario's or Sonic's team. The team that you didn't choose will serve as your rivals, and the other will be your cast of supporting characters. Aside from the story mode, the game has a ton of characters, including some lesser known ones like Jet and Nabbit, but it's just a collection of very basic minigames. The dream events are absent once again, instead a new category called Events Plus making a debut. They are basically the same in concept, a more outlandish version of already existing sports, but they never go to the extent of making something as unique as the dream events. Rio is not as good as Long though, but it deserves the B tier. Talking about the games and on the seas, of course. Sonic Bonfire Nice is the only sequel to ever come out of the Boom series, and more importantly, the last game of today's video. Almost everything that I said about the last Sonic Boom game can be said about this one too, except that the characters are way faster now, making this feel like a proper Sonic game. And oh, aim is playable too. As the name suggests, you now have the ability to control fire and ice. And now what it really does is change the aura of your character, and some stage hazard will react to it, either by melting and opening new paths or by freezing and creating new platforms. But it never really evolves beyond that, sadly. It is just a tad better than the first one, kinda just enough to get it to the B tier. And with that, we have our complete tier list of handheld Sonic games. I'll leave you on the screen so you can have a nice look at it and see where each game is placed, so yeah, take your time. Making this list was very challenging honestly, but kind of rewarding too. I had a chance to find new favorites like Sonic Triple Trouble and experience a lot of legacy titles that I would have never played if it wasn't for this. And yeah, I can see this like my kind of farewell to this handheld legacy of Sonic. And yeah, I don't think I need to explain myself, but this is my opinion. I'm sure that if I try to remake this list like a year from now, some games will change positions. That's nature of something subjective as this, whatever that is. Oh, and before I go, why don't you tell me in the comments your top 3 best handheld Sonic games and your top 3 worst handheld Sonic games. Oh yeah, and since I'm actually a YouTuber now, don't forget to like and subscribe, and see ya next time.